Hello, 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 everybody. Welcome to the Library of Congress National Books Festival. What's up? Yay! All right. Welcome to My Life Considered memoir with Mary Louise Kelly. You can give it up. So she wrote this book called It Goes So Fast. It's a great memoir on journalism and parenting. My name is Andrew Limbong. I am a reporter with the Culture Desk. I'm also host of the Book of the Day podcast, but I haven't been on in a minute because I've been on parental leave. You know, woo, yeah, kids, it's crazy. And so reading this book while pretending to talk to this blob has been a bit much. She doesn't like my jokes that much yet, but we're working on it. Before we get started, I'd like to give a quick shout out to David M. Rubenstein, the co-chair of the National Book Festival, for sponsoring the Creativity Stage. Yeah, shout out to David M. Rubenstein. What up? We're gonna talk for a bit. I've got a couple questions. We'll probably read a little bit from the book, and then we'll leave like a couple minutes at the end for Q&A. Be cool. Don't do the like, oh, it's a comment more than a question thing. Be cool.
Ask good questions.
Yeah, ask good questions. Come on, guys. And then we'll do a signing later at like 5:30, I believe. And then I think that's about all of the paperwork out of the way. So I guess we'll turn to you. What's up, Mary Louise Kelly? How you doing?
I'm great. I'm so happy to be here. I want to thank all of you for coming. This is a pleasure to be up here with you, Andrew, since you're at the other end of this whole parenting cycle than I am with teenagers, and you're 5-month-old?
5-month-old, yeah. So I emailed you about this before, and I was like, when people find out you're gonna have a kid, they're like, oh, it goes so fast, blah, blah, blah. And like before you have the kid, you're like, what are you talking about? Time is time. There's only 24 hours in a day. What are you talking about? Yo, it goes pretty fast. And so, yeah, let's just do a quick overview about why you decided to pause and buckle down and write this book.
Yeah, why I decided to write this book. I don't know that I really decided to write this book so much as, well, the quote I put at the beginning. I open the book with a quote by Toni Morrison, the great Toni Morrison, which is, if there's a book you want to read and it hasn't been written, you should read it. And I'm a writer, and there was a book I really wanted to read, and as far as I could tell, nobody had written it. As I say, I'm at the other end of this whole parenting childhood journey than you are. And when I sat down to start writing this, my 2 boys were 17 and 15. And I have worked at various news organizations, mostly NPR, from my first pregnancy all the way up through now, and have always been in the field and traveled a ton and worked crazy deadlines and have missed a lot. And I always thought, as I considered my choices, next year I might make a different choice, next year I might figure this out. My oldest, James, who loves soccer, lives for soccer, had played since before he could walk. He would, when he was not much older than yours, would crawl along and bat a little Nerf ball along the floor and try to catch it. He was going into senior year of high school. He was starting for his varsity team here in Washington, and their games are weekdays at 4 o'clock. And I have a conflict weekdays at 4 o'clock. Which is, it is to the minute when All Things Considered goes on the air. And that meant I missed the games, pretty much all of them. And I kept thinking, next year I'll figure this out, next year I'll be there, next year I'll make a different choice. But 9th grade slips into 10th, slips into 11th, and I'm not there. And I suddenly, the summer as he was going into senior year of high school, it became really clear, if I'm gonna make a different choice, I need to make it right now. And I did, and I took an extended leave from NPR, and I showed up at pretty much every damn game, and it was great. But it made me think about all the choices I had made that had gotten us there. And as I was wrestling with them, I was interviewing my kids about them, and I started writing, and it became the book.
It's funny when you call it wrestling. There's not a lot of like regret in the book. There's not a lot of like woulda, coulda, shouldas. If I had,
What's the point?
Yeah.
Yeah.
so that's an incredible amount of peace. You know what I mean? It's like was that like hard earned to be like, what's
I don't know that it feels like peace now or ever did. I will say, if there's anything that gives me peace, it's the knowledge for most of the big stuff I did show up. Like as I really wrestled with writing this, I thought there wasn't actually a critical birthday party or camp drop-off or anything like that I missed. And I chronicle standing up from the studio, from the live broadcast of All Things Considered, when I was getting a text from the babysitter from the emergency room. Like when you get a text like that, you stand up, you run. No matter what you're doing. And no matter how startled your co-host and the director look, they're like, you're leaving? We're on air, you have 5 live interviews coming up. Yeah, I'm leaving because my kid's in the emergency room, I'm gonna go. What still rubs at me is the choices, not the big ones. It's all the little ones, and you will see as you go through this, it didn't ever kill me to miss a 4 o'clock game because there were so many. There were so many hundreds. Like they played, the number of soccer games that have populated our calendar over the years between my 2 boys, it's endless, it's infinite. There will be so many more until suddenly there aren't, until you're like on 2 hands and then 1, counting the number of games left. And it's all those gray decisions that are not urgent, they're not earth-shattering, it's not the end of the world if you miss the soccer game, but they add up to the decisions that are the life you're leading and what you've prioritized. And the birthday parties that I missed, or the swimming parties that I missed, or the batches of cookies that were the babysitter in the kitchen and not me. And that's on me. I don't know that my boys cared as long as there were warm chocolate chip cookies. They didn't really care who had baked them, but I miss it. And I look back and think, I didn't realize it would go so fast.
Yeah.
I didn't realize they would grow up so fast and have so many other things to do than hang in the kitchen with me. But here we are.
Yeah. There's a lot of great like dudes moments your sons bring where it's like, oh yeah, they're just happy if they got like Chipotle and $15. They're fine.
I'm a reporter, as you know, and so in trying to write this book, my instinct was I got to report, and so the central characters are my children, and I would ask them sometimes, do you remember this the same way I did? Read this chapter and help me figure out, did I get it right? Does this sound like the right, sequence of events? And I did at one point corner James in the hall outside his bedroom and ask him what's basically the central question of the book. Was there ever a moment when you really needed me and I didn't come because I was working? And he looked down at the floor for a really long time, like a terrifyingly long time, and I thought, he's about to just let me have it. Like, it's all coming out now. And he finally looked up and said, I think there probably were, but I can't remember, and can I have $15 for Chipotle? And I thought, okay.
Dude, men are great, right? We're so good. I want to talk about one big moment that did seem like life or death corner, and it was in Baghdad. You call it the day you hit the wall, I believe. Could you just recount what happened that day?
I was in Baghdad. I was at the time NPR Pentagon correspondent, and part of the job was traveling with the defense secretary when he traveled overseas. And on this day, we were in Iraq. And to move around Iraq, it was not safe for his motorcade to go through the streets, even an armored convoy. So they fly him from whatever meeting he's going through to the next, which means for the press pool accompanying him, we're also being helicoptered from stop to stop. And on this particular day, we are inside the green zone, but you're still in body armor and helmet and the rest, waiting to board a Black Hawk to get to the next set of meetings, and my cell phone rang. and I have to push back my helmet and, ask them to yell so that I can hear. And it's the school nurse back here in Washington telling me that my younger son Alexander is sick and how soon can I get there? And I'm like, that was basically my reaction. I was like, lady, if you could see where I am, it's not happening soon. And then she really did start to yell and say, I don't mean to bring him home. I mean, he's really sick. He's barely breathing. We need to get him to a hospital. We need to get him to a doctor now. Where are you? And I still feel my heart stop, just even talking about it now. And I'm trying to answer her, and I'm thinking, where is my husband? Where is the babysitter? I'm doing the time zone calculation, trying to figure out what time it is in Washington and who I can get there. And as I'm trying to answer her, I lost cell phone signal because they're rushing me onto a Black Hawk and we're taking off. And it was several hours before I could get a phone call through to Washington and hear that he was okay. But I remember being up in the air and looking down over the traffic of Baghdad and thinking, what the hell am I doing? I love my job, and I worked really hard to get here. And I don't know if my 4-year-old is breathing, and I'm halfway around the world. And on the flight home from that trip, we were, on the E4B with the SecDef, and we were flying back to Andrews, and I started writing what became my first novel, because I just thought it is time for career plan B. I want to do something that feels meaningful, but that I'm a little closer for now when these calls come in. And it was a few months, but I quit NPR, just walked away and stayed out of the newsroom for several years and never stopped missing it. I kept thinking I would. When they were, I think when my youngest was maybe 10 or 11, and they were healthy and both thriving in school, and I thought, okay, I think I can go back in. And I did, and here I am.
Yeah. Before you go on a trip like that, there's all the normal prep work, right? You got to make sure your passport's in check. You got to fill out all the paperwork. Make sure you got batteries. Very important.
Snacks.
Yeah, snacks. All that stuff. How did that sort of preparation math change when you had kids? I imagine, my boss came to us it was a year into the war in Ukraine. I just told my boss, hey, I'm going on parental leave. And then I think everybody, we were just going through people there, and he was like, oh, does anybody want to put up their hand and go? And I was like, yo, I ain't going. I got a kid. I'm not but I don't know. I'm curious how that changed in your head, all of that.
So there's the preparations, and then there's the am I going to go?
Yeah.
Is anybody here who works or travels for work and has family, whether it's older or younger, that you're dealing with at home, you're always multitasking. I write in there about being in Ukraine last year, in eastern Ukraine, right up against the front lines, and as we're sorting out the translator and the gear and the logistics and where we're going, I'm texting Alexander back here in Washington to remind him of an appointment at the doggy daycare spa in DuPont Circle, because our Bernedoodle is way overdue for a bath. And I'm looking at my phone thinking, I can't believe I'm in Donbass doing this, but if I don't, it will not get done, and the dog will still be a mess, and so here we go.
Yo, men are crazy. They can't even take care of the dog.
There is no multitasker like a mother in a war zone. I also describe coming back, re-engaging with All Things Considered, anchoring, and then the editors at NPR asking me to go back to Ukraine. This is last spring when things were getting really awful, and I am so invested in this story. I've reported many times over the years from Russia and was invested in the war in Ukraine, and the journalist in me desperately wanted to go back and do another rotation. But when they send a host in, you're going in with the team, you're going into a war zone. You can't say for sure, I'll be a yes, I can definitely make it back out next Tuesday, or even a month from next Tuesday. You don't know what's going to happen or how it will all unfold. And the time they were asking me to go in was late last spring, which was spring of James's senior year. And he's coming up to final exams and prom and the very last lacrosse games that he would ever play. And I wrestled with it and then said, no, I'm going to sit this one out. I need to be here. I need to be home. And I wrestle with it every time. Every single time I'm about to go out on a long assignment, there's a moment when the taxi is pulling up to the front door to take me to Dulles or Andrews or wherever. And I look back, and whether they're 5 months old or 5 years old or now, in their late teens, there's this moment where I want to just call the whole thing off, go back inside and build a pillow fort. It's like all you want to do. What I have learned and what has helped me in decisions like that is the knowledge that there will always be another story. There will always be another election. There will always, sadly, be another war. And there will always be another journalist who can cover it, but there is nobody who can be a mom to my kids but me. And when I've faced decisions like that of needing to be in two places at the same time, I often circle back and think, somebody else can cover this war next month. Nobody else can be mom on prom night. So I'm gonna pick that.
How's prom night? Prom night was good? Prom night was good?
Yes, is the short answer.
All right, let's talk about former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Yeah, what's up? Shout out Mike Pompeo. I think folks in this room, maybe remember your interaction, tiff, hullabaloo. Interview. Let's call it an interview with him. But for folks who don't know, do you mind refreshing some memories?
Say that again.
For folks who don't know, you mind refreshing some people's memories?
In January of 2020, I went to the State Department to interview Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. I had been asking for months for an interview. And they came through early in 2020, which, just to remind of major events unfolding in January 2020 that you might want to ask the Secretary of State about. What seemed to me like the two biggies were Iran. That was when the US had just assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, and the US and Iran nearly went to war. And I was in Tehran reporting on it earlier in January and had interviewed the foreign minister there and was nearly pulled out multiple times by NPR's international desk because it looked like there might be incoming missile strikes by the US on Tehran. It was tense. And so that was an obvious thing I wanted to ask Pompeo about. The other thing happening in January 2020 was we didn't know at the time it would be the first impeachment trial, but the first impeachment trial of then President Trump on matters to do with Ukraine. And this infamous phone call that Trump and President Zelensky had in which Trump said, I would like you to do us a favor. And there were not that many people on that call, but one of them was Mike Pompeo. And in the impeachment proceedings, many of the key witnesses were diplomats for the State Department who worked for him. So I show up at the State Department. They've given us 10 minutes for an interview. We started with Iran, and then after 7 minutes or so, I switched to Ukraine, and Secretary Pompeo was deeply unhappy to be asked about Ukraine, said he didn't want to talk about it, despite himself did. It got very contentious, and one of his staffers ended the interview before the full 10 minutes. And they left the room. I thanked him, as always, at the end of an NPR interview, and he said nothing, but got in my face, like way closer than that, like you'd have to scoot your chair right over, in my face and glared, and then left the room. Okay, so we're packing up, and then they reappeared and summoned me back to his living room on the 7th floor of the State Department, where he yelled at me for about the same amount of time as the interview. Asked, and please pardon my language, but I'm trying to quote accurately here, asked, "Do you think Americans care about fucking Ukraine?" And I said, "Yes." "Could you even find Ukraine on a fucking map?" And I said, "Yes." And he called for his aides to bring us a map, a strange map with no writing on it, no names, no borders, just blobs of continents. And I pointed to Ukraine, and he put the map away and said, "People will hear about this." And I said, "Yes, they will, because we're about to air the interview in full." And I thanked him again. And then we carried through with our plan. This was an interview in the morning, and our plan had been, if the interview made news, we would rush it onto Morning Edition, which was on air live at that hour. So we ran to the booth at NPR, as a lot of big news organizations keeps at the State Department, and I went live on Morning Edition a few minutes later and reported it. Now, there were multiple conversations back at the newsroom over whether to report the map test portion of the interview, because it was not on tape. It was on the record, but it was not on tape, and I'm not interested in gotcha journalism, and I'm thinking, what would the purpose be served if we aired this? I'm not trying to embarrass anyone. How should we think this through? And in the end, I came around to thinking, my job is to report what happened and put facts out there, and people can make up their minds what they want to think about it. And it seemed to me it was inherently newsworthy to hear what our top diplomat thought about Ukraine, what value he put on the US-Ukraine relationship. It seemed newsworthy for Americans to know how our top diplomat conducted himself behind a closed door. And so we reported it. And I called the State Department before doing so to tell them I planned to do it and ask if they wanted to offer any context or comment or explanation, and they did not. The next morning, Secretary Pompeo put out a statement on State Department letterhead calling me a liar, and suggesting that I had confused Ukraine with Bangladesh. To which I will only say Bangladesh is on a different continent. It is thousands of miles away. And the last thing I will say is, this got picked up and made headlines around the world, not least because then he kicked our State Department correspondent, Michelle Kellerman, off the plane for the trip he was about to leave on, which you couldn't have made this up, but he had to stop in Ukraine. It got reported as that there was some kind of feud with NPR, a vendetta, and I just want to say for the record, there is not. I have no feud with Mike Pompeo. He's a smart man, and I wish him well. And I will say what went through my head in that interview and in that room as he's swearing at me and holding this map in front of me was a couple of things. One is, he doesn't owe me an answer to any of these questions. He doesn't owe NPR, but we go and do our job as surrogates for all of you who won't get to go ask these questions. And in that particular instance, I felt I was asking questions on behalf of all the diplomats, including several of his senior staffers who had left the department, resigned in protest, who weren't going to get to question him. They deserve us to ask these questions and keep pressing on them and not back down. And I felt that, and I felt the importance of our being there and reporting it. I also felt, people have asked me, was it scary? And the honest answer is no, it's a little surreal. But it wasn't scary, and I think I felt very grateful in that moment to work for a news organization that would have lawyers and editors who would back me up. Because I thought, what if I report this and he denies it? There was only one other person in the room and she worked for him. Could be a he said, she said thing, and all I can say is what happened. I was grateful to work at NPR, which stood up and stood with me and supported our journalism, and I was grateful to live in a country with a First Amendment that protects our right to ask these questions.
Who is harder to grill, a head of state or a teenage boy?
Excellent question. One shorter way of answering that would be to say, when I speak to journalism schools or talk to people who are considering coming into our profession or just starting and they're asking for interview tips, one of the things I often share is embrace silence. If you're doing an interview, a contentious one or otherwise, and you ask a question, don't always, if somebody doesn't answer immediately, the instinct, it's uncomfortable. Silence, dead air is uncomfortable, and your instinct is to race in. But some of the most revealing interviews I've done have been, you ask somebody an uncomfortable question, and then you wait. And you felt how uncomfortable that was. If you do that for 5-10 seconds on air, it's just uncomfortable, but it sometimes produces the most revealing, honest answer of the interview. And I mention that by way of saying, as I've interviewed heads of state or big wigs, big muckety mucks, wherever, I have yet to do an interview where they don't eventually cave and answer the question. With my teenagers, they have a 100% track record of getting me to cave first if I'm grilling them on, why did you miss curfew, or who ate the piece of cake that I was saving in the fridge. I just get this. I sit there a long time.
Oh, boys, man.
Things to look forward to.
Yeah. A couple of times you bring up this Ukrainian activist, Hannah Hopko, right? Who, she's, going through the war. You talk to her, and she brings up that her daughter wants like a guinea pig, and she's like, "Well, I gotta drag this guinea pig around or whatever." And you bring out these great points where it's like your experience then as a mother allows you like different access points that you wouldn't have had before. Can you talk a little bit about that?
So Hannah Hopko is a remarkable woman. She's a Ukrainian. I met her in Ukraine covering the conflict last year. I asked to interview her because she was one of the original leaders of the Maidan protests back in 2014 and had then been elected to parliament, ended up chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee, this incredibly accomplished, impressive woman. And when I was interviewing her in Ukraine, she was incredibly stressed out about the Russian invasion, but also, yes, about that her daughter had been begging for a guinea pig, and the daughter had gotten good grades and had, fulfilled whatever the task was that had been set for her to get this pet, but Hannah was like, what am I gonna do? I'm trying to evacuate my family out through Lviv and into Poland, and I can't handle a rodent in the cage and the pellets and I got enough. I can't be evacuating guinea pigs. Long story short, she got the guinea pig. They did evacuate the guinea pig. And I've interviewed her multiple times as this war has unfolded, and we talk about NATO, and we talk about missiles, and we talk about, all of the big picture stuff, and then I always ask about the guinea pig, and how's your daughter and the guinea pig, and they now have a puppy whose mom was a husky who was killed in the fighting in eastern Ukraine, but the puppies survived, so they've adopted the puppy. It's this whole story. But as I reflected on that, I thought about, and I think your question is getting at, I am a different journalist for being a mother. The kind of questions I ask are different. My 20-something self, when I was covering wars at the time for the BBC, if some woman had started talking about a guinea pig, I would have been like, what? Like, who cares? There are armies on the move here. Can we focus? And I now realize that's the story. Like, that's the story that will bring home to all of us here in air-conditioned comfort in a city that Russian troops are not about to invade, and make you understand, oh, I can't imagine what it would be like to have tanks bearing down from Russia crossing the border, but I can imagine what it feels like trying to pack up a guinea pig and the pellets and the food and all this. Like, I feel that, and it brings home what that story is and what the human stakes are, and it reinforces to me why it is important to have parents doing these jobs. The stories we see are different. It matters to have women doing these jobs. Our colleague Leila Fadel did all kinds of incredibly powerful coverage out of Kyiv, but one of the stories that will stick with me is she was walking down the street. This is early in the war when it was normal life had not resumed in any way, but there was a nail salon open and a woman walking in to get her nails done. And Leila thought, really? In the middle of a war? Okay. She interviewed her and the woman said, I get that this is frivolous, I get that my friends are dying on the front lines, but Vladimir Putin is not allowed to take everything of beauty and joy. And so I'm gonna get my nails done bright blue and I'm gonna do this to you, Vladimir Putin. You do not get to take this away. And I thought, it was just a great story. And with all due respect, our male colleagues would have walked right past it. They would have never seen it. They would have never thought to ask. They wouldn't even have noticed the nail salon. It matters to have women in these positions, and it matters to have moms in these positions and parents, because the stories we tell are different and they matter.
Yeah. It does strike me, I'm thinking back to your Baghdad story, where it was you that they called anyway. You know, there's another number there on the list, but it's still you that they called, right? And, you know, I think a lot about like how there's a certain type of like dude journalist who can like throw themselves entirely into their work and be, you know, kind of, it's not quite a 50-50 household, if you know what I mean, you know, like not picking up like their share of like the childcare duties, whatever. How did you see like discrepancies between like fathers and mothers who do this job?
I think it's getting better. I do think it's getting better. It is true that the school nurses always call the moms first. It just is. I have been asked, you know, why did you take the call? You had, the babysitter was there, your husband was in DC, why are you even worrying about it? And I thought, I wouldn't want to miss that call. I want to get that. As heartbreaking as it was, that's the job. I want to take that call. I do think it's getting better, and I'll offer the tiniest example. My children are now 17 and 20. So my maternity leave was a while ago, but not ancient history. And NPR at the time offered 1 week. Maternity leave, nothing for the dads, 1 week paid. You could take your vacation, and I'm looking at this thinking, this is not vacation. this is like, I recently had occasion to interview Sabrina Siddiqui of the Wall Street Journal. She covers the White House for the Journal. And the reason I was interviewing her was because she had just been asked to go with Biden into Ukraine when he went. They took 2 reporters for the pool, the Wall Street Journal and the AP. And she was just back from maternity leave and still nursing. So when she was asked to go, her top question was, I need to pump and I need to get the milk home, and how is this gonna work in a war zone? And the great thing is, the people she's having this conversation with were the White House press secretary, a woman, a working mom, and Tamara Keith, our colleague, president of the White House Correspondents Association, a working mom. And they said, we've got you. We've already thought about this. These are the logistics for the Secret Service. This is how we're gonna get the milk home. This is how we're gonna keep it cold. And I thought, wow. Because 15 years ago, I just would have said, I'm out, tag out, pass, I obviously can't do this. Well, yeah, you can. And all it takes is having other working moms in the room to say, yes, you can, and here's how we're going to do it.
I think my favorite chapter in this book doesn't have anything to do with journalism, doesn't have anything to do with parenting. It's the one about like missing wolf whistles, you know? It's the one about feeling mixed and ambivalent about like the attention of men, right? And you're like navigating these lines, but you're like playing it kind of defensively. There's like a, whoa, I got a point here. You know, there's a lot of anticipating, like people yelling. And it is, I think, like kind of a brave chapter to write, but I'm wondering why you thought it was important to have that out there.
I did write a chapter about missing wolf whistles, and we promised to take your questions, and I want to leave time for a couple of them. So if you care to wolf whistle as the beginning of your question, feel free. I will briefly say, first of all, I get the y'all are like, you wrote what? You wrote about missing wolf whistles? Had you told the 20-year-old self, who would have been like, why are we talking guinea pigs? Had you told her I would miss wolf whistles and admit that out loud, she would not have known where to begin telling you that I had lost my mind. But I turned 50 not that long ago, and it is true that I can now walk through something like this and feel kind of invisible. It's just a different feeling in how you move through the world, and I didn't notice it until men mostly stopped whistling. And I wanted to write about that because the book is all about interior changes in my life and inside my home. But as those are happening, you know, for a woman in her 50s, how the world sees you is also changing. And I wanted to write about it as honestly as I could, and I tried. And the coda to that is, as I was on book tour with this book this spring and crossing a traffic junction not far from here, a guy drove past and gave me a huge wolf whistle and was like, hey, baby. And I turned and was like, thank you so much, thank you. And I'm sure he thought I was insane, but I got one more in there. So, should we take a couple questions?
Yeah, let's take a couple. Would you got one?
Hi.
I'm not shy. Hi, Mary Louise.
Hi.
John Michelson, it's good to see you again.
Hi.
I'm glad you talked about how women cover different stories. So I'd like you to also talk about two things. One is how women ask questions differently and the questions that women ask differently. And also how you go about creating what you cover in the 2 hours you have on All Things Considered. Because in full disclosure, I'm a reporter, as you know, but the audience doesn't, and I cover environment, climate, and related topics, energy. And unless we're in the middle of massive heat or a hurricane or whatever, those stories don't get covered unless it's a crisis. So I'm a little biased on this, I'll admit it. But so many of the news organizations just cover the same bleeping stories over and over and over
Right.
and over again. So you have 2 hours. You have
Yeah.
120 minutes minus inserts. So
How do we decide what we cover?
how do you decide
Got
what
it.
to cover?
So the first question, women asking different questions, I have actually always found it an advantage in my line of work to be a woman. I think I get less flack for interrupting aggressively and often when the occasion requires, in ways that my male colleagues might be accused of mansplaining or not letting somebody finish a sentence. Sometimes my job, if I'm interviewing you live and we got 5 minutes and I got stuff I got to get to, I'm going to be interrupting. And I think a woman can do that in a way that is seen as less rude. And I've always been grateful for that. I will also say it gives me access in some parts of the world to way more people than my male colleagues. When I've reported from Iran or Afghanistan or Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, I can go sit down with the president or the foreign minister, but I can also go into homes and kitchens and meet women and ask, how you doing? What's for dinner? What are your hopes? What are your dreams for your kids, for you? Those are conversations my male colleagues cannot have in some places, and I have access to 50% of the population that they don't. So I've always found it actually quite an advantage, and I'm grateful to be a woman as a foreign correspondent and also here. To the how do we program, all things considered, we, every day at 9:30, have a pitch meeting, and you can come in and pitch everything from the hard news of the day, how are we gonna cover the Trump indictment, to some truly off-the-wall madcap stuff. And the idea over 2 hours is that we will hopefully get to as much of it as we can. We have a 2-hour rundown, and I look at it every day and try to make sure we are hitting, in each hour, are we taking you somewhere in the country? Are we taking you somewhere in the world? Are we hitting the hard news stuff that we have to cover, whether it's politics or pandemic or climate? We led both hours of the show yesterday with Hawaii, and I take your point that it's a crisis. Sadly, those are becoming more and more frequent, so more and more part of the news, and trying to get at some of the bigger questions, not just the how many people were evacuated, how many people horribly did we lose, but what's causing this? What do we do about it? I also look and try to think, every half hour, is there somewhere where I or my co-host are gonna smile or laugh? Because if we're having fun, hopefully you are too, and that matters in a period where there is profound news exhaustion. And I get it, and we feel the same. And so we're trying to find that balance between doing responsible, serious, investigative journalism, but also a little humanity and grace and laughter goes a long way. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you for what you do every day.
Thank you.
I think we could do one more.
Hi, thank you so much for coming out. So I am early in my career. I did a stint at my local NPR station. I've been fortunate enough to pursue a lot of different opportunities. I am also recently married. Thank you. However, in some of the stuff that you've already talked about in finding this place where you are chasing your dreams, where you're chasing your work, and had to have some sacrifices along the way. I am currently here in DC for a great 3-month opportunity, but I'm also doing long distance with my spouse. So in your writing, and in writing this memoir and this book, how you've had to sort of reflect on your own life, what advice would you give for people kind of in this stage in their career on finding that balance between personal relationships and the aspirations and work that you want to do?
Yeah, thank you, great question. I certainly haven't found it. I think part of the exercise of writing this was realizing I don't know that there's a single one of us who's figured this out. I don't know that there's any of us who on, the average given week doesn't have a couple days where you're hanging on by your toenails. And I have found it a relief just to realize it's not just me. I write about a competitor at another news organization who has kids around the same age as me, who I bumped into at one point when I had taken a long spell away from the newsroom. And I bumped into her, and she was all chic and off to the White House for an interview. And as she climbed in a taxi and sped away, I just thought, oh my God, have I thrown away my career? Have I stepped away from everything for forever? And when I ran into her again, however long afterward it was, she told me she'd cried the whole day after running into me, saying, you were with your son, you were on your way to the park, you looked so happy. And I was stuffed into Spanx and off to this interview and thought, what am I doing with my life? And I said, I was having the same thought. And I realized, so much is what we choose to see. I don't think a single one of us has figured out how to be in the park with our kid and at the White House doing an interview at the same time. And I don't know what the specifics of your juggle are, but we all have a million moments where you need to be in two places at once and you can't. What do you do? I don't have an answer to it. I have a whole lot of empathy and solidarity for saying we're all doing our best. We're all just making the best decisions we can with the information we have at this moment. Extending the grace to yourself that you would to any of your friends or your colleagues. You're doing your best. You're making it up as you go, as are we all. I used to think there were grown-ups out there. There are no grown-ups. We're all making it up as we go. So I wish you luck, and I wish you joy, and thank you for the question.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much for your time. This has been great. We're going to do a signing after
We're
this.
going to do a signing.
Yeah, so come through, whatever. Thank you all for coming out, right? Give yourself a round of applause.